And we should be live right now. Yep, we're live.
Okay, here we go. David, Simon, Jessica, and Micah reporting for duty. Uh, ocean friends, bird loving friends among the ocean friends, thanks for being here. Thanks, David and Simon. We've got a couple of ornithologists. We'll get into what that is later, but you're like professional birdmen, essentially, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Amongst other things, yeah.
Sometimes dealing with bats and cats, it seems. Where are each of you joining us from today?
I'm in London, England, Northern Hemisphere.
I'm in Oxfordshire, so yeah, near Oxford.
Cool. Jessica's in New York City. I'm in North Carolina. A bunch of people are out in the ether, and we're talking about your work in the Red Sea. So this was late last year. You guys were out there surveying some birds on what looks like a Mars, as you say in this short film. Should we roll the film and take a look at it, and then we'll dive into what the hell you were doing in the Red Sea on this barren-looking island, and we'll do kind of the director's cut version. We'll get the behind the scenes.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. Are you nervous to see yourselves? No, you're professionals.
What about the birds? What about the birds? The Neon region is very much unexplored. There's not a lot of data from these islands. 4 islands in total, and we're pretty much. A sooty falcon is a small bird of prey, part of the falcon family. It's like a missile with wings, basically. They're highly trained to knock out a small bird out of the sky, grabbing them, bringing them back to the mainland. They're absolutely lethal, beautiful, majestic creatures to watch. We were the ones who were tasked with actually getting a real decent idea of the number of the birds at this time of year. 30 nests on one of the islands, so we're talking close to 10% of the entire global population. So the sooty falcons are very clever. They time it so that their young are hatching as the migration comes through, and as it peaks, they can stuff their bellies with all of these lovely migrants that are waiting to be popped out of the sky by them. Just find bits of legs, heads, wings, all over the place, all around the nest. Oh, what's that? Wait it. That's wet as well. So they pick out the sea drift. That'd be amazing. When they've eaten, they'll swallow the bird with feathers and bones and everything, and then they'll cough it up. And in that, it leaves the feathers behind. So we took that back to the boat, and in the lab, we dissected it. Do you like that feather? Is it two feathers?
It's part of the tail, I think.
Sooty falcons look like they were having these caches where they stuffed their birds in there, creating this like stash, like a cupboard full of food later on to feast on. Some of these species are so dependent on various factors that if any of them change, like with the sooty falcons, and that species are potentially going to wipe out and become extinct.
The sooty falcons are in such a few locations that each one becomes super important at that point.
That also means that we are able to identify real hotspots for them. So if they want to do anything to the islands, we're like, this one is a real no-go area. That's really important for the birds. It's critical. We should not do anything around that area. Look at that. That's a beauty.
Cool.
Maybe 10 metres. There's a group of sooty falcons. Maybe 2. Maybe a dozen. There are moments where my mind wanders and you're like really tired. You've been up before dawn like 4 times a week or something like that. And then you've got to go out and you've got to try and stay enthusiastic. And in those moments, like when you're really exhausted, tired, you may see like one bird. Oh, I've got a bird maybe 5 kilometres away, just right at the island. It just gives you all the passion. You're like, yes!
Yeah.
My legs are dying, but I feel fantastic. That's fun. See? Wow.
There are bad days and things like that, but it still doesn't really feel like it should be a real job. We get paid to do something which we absolutely love doing.
It's breathing to me. It can just be something really odd that's just like you're not expecting. You're like, yes! Oh! Like you want to run around screaming and jumping. That's real heaven.
Stirring. Truly. So that was you guys doing some surveys, right, in the Red Sea. What exactly were you doing? I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so we were out there trying to find what birds were nesting on the islands. So the main thing at that time of year we were there was the sooty falcons, which is a globally threatened species. So there's not a huge population of them around the world. You're looking at like something like about 3,000 to 6,000 pairs, something like that. So any small congregations of them suddenly become very important. So we're wandering around the islands, trying to locate active nest sites that have been used this year and trying to find if there's any young in the air to work out the population size per island out there.
And other species as well. So yeah, so not just the sooty falcons, just trying to work out how important these islands are for a whole range of species. So the seabirds like the terns and the boobies, birds of prey like the ospreys, and then just general ecology on the islands as a whole. So reptile species, anything like that might be there too.
Did you know ahead of time that there were sooty falcons and things on this island, or was it these islands and this region in general, like not much has been documented ecologically about them? So were you like, okay, this looks promising, it could be a total bust, you know? How was it setting out?
So no one's done, as far as we knew, no one had done actual work on the islands in terms of setting foot on them. We had reports, there's a guy that's done a lot of work over there and has done a fantastic job of sort of getting an idea of islands that have got the birds on, but has never actually been onto the land. So his work previously had just been driving around the island on a boat, essentially, which is still really useful, but you don't get a full picture. So we think that we were the first people to actually properly set foot on the island and give a decent count of the number of nests that were on them. So really lucky, super lucky.
It was fairly given that most of these islands would have sooty falcons on them and other birds nesting. We wasn't sure what the mix would be like, the density. So some of the islands only had like a couple of pairs of sooty falcons, and others were just chock-a-block, like a tower block with them. They were just every like 10 meters there was another pair. It was like phenomenal, and I was kind of hoping to see a few good views of them. But when you've been dive bombed by them constantly. It's just like a sensational experience, you know. And when we were moored off these islands early in the morning, you got the sooty falcons going out in like the complete twilight hunting, because their vision is so good, streaming across the sea looking for migrants and then knocking them out of the sky to feed to their young and consume themselves. So it was an amazing, breathtaking experience. And we didn't know really what the islands were going to be like either. You know, the one you saw us mostly on was, you know, it was like Mars. It was like this reddy, orangey colour, and it was like rocky and barren. There was like no vegetation at all almost. So that was like really, it was breathtaking really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really cool. And if we were worried that we weren't going to see anything, I think the first island we went to before we'd even got off the tender, there was sooty falcons mobbing us. We were getting that noise, the calling that you heard at the start of your video. They were just doing that the entire time, just dive bombing us. So yeah, we knew that they were there more or less straight away. It was great.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about well, we've got a few questions from the chat, which I think we should get into, but some of the adaptations. So you mentioned sort of, for one thing, the kind of the strategy of the sooty falcons. It's pretty cool. Sooty falcon seems like an underrated raptor. Is it a raptor? It's a raptor.
Yes.
That people should probably know more about. But then the ospreys and some of the seabirds on this island do things a little differently. So like nesting on the ground is weird for an osprey. Like, what were some of the kind of surprising highlights that you got to document and discover while you're out there?
Yeah, so like with the Ospreys are known for being quite different in the Red Sea, and they're very poorly studied, and they actually think they could be their own separate race and potentially their own separate species compared to ones that breed in Europe or even across Asia and into North America as well. So normally, like in Northern Europe, you get ospreys nesting at tops of tall trees like pines quite close to lakes, where here they're nesting on the ground. And I found some research indicating that they continually work on their nest, and that they do about 45 centimeters every 20 years. So when we found an osprey nest that was sort of like up to my hip, you're looking at a meter, which is then potentially sort of like 20, 30 years old worth of nesting material just piled up there. And it was interesting because we saw all sorts of bits and pieces on these nests. There was like rope, frequently footwear was a feature as well. So there was Crocs, there was bits of trainers, that sort of thing, people's jumpers. I think there was a pair of undergarments as well, stashed on one of the nest sites as well, which is very different.
Where are they getting jumpers and trainers and things like out in the middle of the Red Sea on these like little?
Anything that floats, isn't it? They'll just pick it up, try and impress the lady osprey, bring it back, say, look what I found today.
Yeah, I think it's stuff washed up along the shoreline, because there was lots of debris along the shoreline. They're scavenging for like twigs and branches, and if something else comes along that catches their eye, they're utilising it.
This is the nest you're talking about with like the little rope.
Yeah, that's a very fresh one, like maybe 1 or 2 years old, where other ones that I had images of were like really tall in comparison. So it gives you an idea. If you were able to study these and work out, you could actually gauge the age of nests and how frequently they're being used by the height of them. And when we talked in the video about the sooty falcons stashing creches of food, there's another species which is slightly more familiar to people called the Eleanorus falcon, which is based purely in the Mediterranean Sea. And there they've discovered that they store live birds ready to be eaten later on. And I wondered whether or not the sooty falcons were doing a similar sort of thing. But because no one's actually been on these islands on a frequent basis, it's really hard to study them and understand. But all the seabirds there nest at different times of the year. So earlier on in the season is when the ospreys are nesting, and the brown boobies, they returning back to the nest sites in January, February. And then you've got different species of terns coming in. The Saunders terns nest sort of like in March time. And then by May, you've got stuff like the white-cheeked terns turning up to nest. But the sooty falcons delay everything until like August time. That's when they're back on their territory, start laying eggs, so that their young hatch as the bird migration comes through. So they get all this extra food to feed them on. And there's a similar method that Eleanorus falcons do, but they're much more widespread over a bigger geographical range and a larger population compared to the sooty. So sooty falcon's quite a bit of an enigma bird, and lots of my friends who travel around the world are really hyped up when I tell them that I've seen loads of sooty falcons like in your face, not just distantly, but almost parting your hair, which is great fun.
Okay, two questions here. First, who are the migrant birds that are coming through that the sooty falcons are eating? And second, you're telling me if somebody wants to get into birding, sooty falcon is like kind of the flex bird to see. It sounds like
one of
yeah.
They don't. They're not in many places, so they'll spend the breeding season around the region that we were working in, and then they winter down in Madagascar, and that's more or less the only travelling that they do. They don't migrate particularly far, but they're pretty restricted in numbers and in range as well. So you've got to go to those places to even have a chance of seeing them. But in terms of the birds which they're catching, it's a passerine, so mostly passerine, so perching birds. Things like wheatears, larks. We found remains of hoopoe as well, so quite a fancy bird. Warblers. The pellet that we found there was a really small species of warbler that they'd caught. So yeah, it's a real range, but generally anything that's the same size or smaller than them, they'll take. We did see them have a really good fight with some gulls as well, didn't we?
Yeah, so that part of the Red Sea is an epicenter for bird migration coming out of Asia, Eastern Europe, heading straight down into Africa to spend the winters. You've got thousands of birds streaming through over several months. So this is a huge abundance of food for them, which is why exactly they time it like that. So it's following on all the other birds that have bred in Northern Europe, then charge through, and then it's like dinner time. And they fill their bellies basically.
It's easy pickings.
Certainly is. Yeah, and they're all tired as well. Lots of the birds have been travelling for a long time, so they've gone through all their fat reserves, not been able to drink or eat. So they're absolutely exhausted and really, really easy for the birds to catch.
We mentioned gulls, and there's some footage of you guys discussing why you shouldn't call gulls seagulls. And there were some gulls on the island, and I'm curious to get into this gull discussion because I think most people are familiar with gulls, not seagulls. But hearing that you shouldn't call them seagulls like raises an eyebrow, and I'm like, this is a good learning moment for me as well. It changed my perspective.
That's my massive bugbear when people refer to birds as being gulls as being seagulls, because that kind of gives the impression they're only far out to sea. And there's a few species that are mostly out to sea, but they all come to land to breed, and that's the big thing. They all need islands, they need coastal areas to breed. They're not completely depending on being miles out to sea. This is a sooty gull, and you get them only in, I think, East Africa, the Red Sea, and I think round into Arabia as well. And one of the other species we saw there was white-eyed gull, and that's nearly purely endemic to the Red Sea. Again, these are really interesting species to see. The sooty gull has a much wider range of a diet, and therefore that's why you can get it in different areas. But the white-eyed gull is really specific, a fish feeder, so you get them mostly just in the Red Sea. So they're really localized, and it makes it very important for conservation to understand how big these populations are. But they're no truly like pelagic species of gull. We get them all over the place. They travel inland, they blow all over around the globe. So they're absolutely fascinating species. But I just get upset with this one label of seagull. If you want to upset me, use the S word in front of me.
Well, what are some other good ways to upset a birder? I'm curious now. Like, Simon, do you have a bugbear?
Well, there's a certain type of birder. I think we spoke about it on the social media before, when the old man twitches, that sort of thing. So that's a bit of a dirty word. We tend to be preferred to be called birders, because that's a slightly more normal person would do that, whereas a twitcher is solely ticking birds. I'm
sorry, a twitcher?
Yeah, so the sort of person that would travel thousands of miles to see one certain bird. So say something in the UK would turn up on Fair Isle. They would they'd get on a plane in London essentially and fly up there, spending thousands of pounds and potentially not even seeing the bird, which is always quite funny when that happens, to be honest. David's sort of a mixture. He does a bit of dirty twitching as well as birding. So he's one to talk, really.
Yeah, so I mean, twitching is really going to see a specific species that you would not normally go to see. So you hear about maybe a rare bird, or and then you just travel specifically for that. So someone I know actually travelled to Japan just to see a Baird's pochard, a wintering site out there. So he did a whole trip from UK to Japan just to see this one bird. Where the other week, I was in Kent, which is southern England, and news broke there was an albatross, black-browed albatross in Yorkshire. So I drove all the way up there, which was another 5.5 hours to go and see it, because an albatross was one of those big things I really wanted to see. And there it was, just drifting around in front of me in all its glory, and I was very excited. And then I had to drive another 5 hours back home again. So that's the kind of crazy thing that happens. But it could be like, when I was younger, I was at home once and my dad found this wood warbler, which is a tiny little perching bird that has this beautiful trilling song. And he came home and told me, and I ran all the way down to the local park to see it, because I'd never seen one before. And I was like uber excited. It was trilling its wings, doing this song like that. It was just an amazing experience. So it can be local, it can be distant, it can be like a gazillion miles away.
It's more of you're appreciating like every bird, right? Not just the rare distant ones.
Yeah, it's not just a case of ticking it.
Yeah, I mean, some Twitchers are just purely about ticking that one species and then they're happy and then they're done and off they go on to the next one. Where I like to observe and watch and study these birds in detail and look at them in minute level. So sometimes I look at different molts of the feathers, I look at individuality in the birds. I mean, I'm quite obsessive in making sound recordings, so I'll travel all around the place. And sometimes I go to one spot just to sound record specific species and then collect a whole load of them. So like if you look on global databases, there's only like a few recordings of sooty falcon, but I've collected quite a few from my travels last autumn and just waiting for the final permission to be able to post these online for the world to enjoy as well.
What do people learn from the calls? Just how majestic and glorious the bird voices are?
there's that one simple level to it. Yeah, and then there's a bigger detail. So like if you look at any species that's quite widespread, let's say the osprey, you may discover that the ones in North America call slightly differently to the ones in Northern Europe. And then they may call differently again to the ones in the Red Sea. And it helps us understand whether or not subspecies, which is like slightly different races of birds, are actually individual species. And it goes in tandem with looking at biometrics, looking at ranges, do they overlap, what's the DNA analysis like as well. So they may play an important part in working out what's the species. And then conservation level changes, because if the Red Sea population of ospreys is only like 4,000 pairs, and we find 20 pairs across a few islands, then that makes it very important. And then of course some species are very difficult to identify by sight, but by sound is so much easier. They have very distinctive calls, sometimes very distinctive songs, and all of these are different aspects of vocalization that they use. So the song is often like to proclaim territory and attract a mate. This is how beautiful I am, listen to my gorgeous voice, let's come and start a family, let's build a nest, and off we go. And then they use alarm calls to signify there's a predator here, like a sooty falcon, and tell all the other birds in the area, run! It's danger. Or they'll have like a distress call, which is like quite high pitched sometimes with birds, and that's to say there's something up, don't move, kind of thing, And young birds, like if you go to emperor penguin colonies, you're looking at 1.2 million birds, and each individual young has a distinctive call that the adults recognise. So when he comes in, he hasn't got to go around shouting out, where's Wilbert? He knows exactly where Wilbert is, because Wilbert has that specific call he can pick up in 1.2 million other birds.
Wilbert is a great...
Wilbert, the Emperor King Penguin, or whatever I said.
Jessica and I were talking about this before we went live with you guys, that if you made a Venn diagram of like ocean stuff and bird stuff, penguins are definitely like in the overlap. But how do some other birds kind of interact with the ocean? Like how is birding for seabirds different than like land birding? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's more of a challenge because often with seabirds, they're far out to sea in the winter and on migration, and then they come to islands to breed, and some of them will only come at night to avoid predators. So you've got stuff like the Manx shearwater, which the UK has something like 75% of the world's population. It's like a small little albatross, and they only come to land at night in their burrows once it's completely dark, so none of the gulls or other predators can get to them. And then once they finish breeding, I believe they all winter off the coast of Argentina. They do this massive migration and then come back again in the springtime to breed. So when you're looking at seabirds, people often have to go out in boats to try and observe these species or go out at night. So when I was in Madeira, I went to see the Zeno's petrel, which lands on the top of the mountains at night. So you have to go out like at 10 o'clock at night, wait till about 11, and then they fly in calling. And there's only about 200 pairs of them in the whole world, just on this one island. So it's really, sometimes it can be an amazing experience. Sometimes you're out on boats out to sea, bobbing around, and you have this thing called chum, which is basically oil and fish guts all blended up, and you put it on the surface of the sea, and the species of seabirds can smell it, and they come in their masses and feed. And that's where but it's a bit pongy, and it's not always good to people's constitution either.
We were pretty hopeful on the Ocean X trip that we were going to get some nice stuff turning up, because the shark scientists were chumming quite a lot on their trip. So we were hoping that stuff would come in, like seabird wise would come in and start feeding on that, but they never really had much turn up. Was slightly late in the year for those species of birds, really. But if we were there like right time of year and they were doing the same sort of work, you could get some really, really exciting birds turning up then. Some of the petrels and things like that would be great to see.
But you did see some birds, I believe, that David had sent us. This one.
These are terns.
The terns? Oh, I can pull those up. Here, let me share this one while I pull up the terns, because this one to me, I don't know why, but it kind of makes me laugh with its face.
This is a young brown boobie. So they plunge dive into the sea. So they fly along and then they fold their wings in and go smash into the water. And their skull is designed to withstand high impact, so they can dive like several meters underneath to catch the fish. So these are really nice species to see. They often nest in quite large colonies sometimes as well.
Really best.
And then
we found these guys. They just have a little tiny scrape on the ground, but it's just, there's like a poo splatter all around it. It's like they've been painting.
Jackson Pollock.
Oh, very much. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so this is a mixed group of, you've got a brown booby at the front there, and then you've got mostly lesser crested terns, which are the ones with the power foreheads. And the second one from the left is actually a great crested tern, sometimes referred to as a swift tern. And when we were out in the northern Red Sea, we had a young being fed by the adult, which shows that they've bred very locally to there, which they'd suspected in the past, but this was like the first time we'd had confirmed evidence of them. So they're a really nice species to see. But they were often on these buoys floating around at sea, and sometimes we had large flocks of them moving through. I think we had like 75 in one big flock, which was really impressive to see. And then they go out and all start diving, where you get balls of fish brought to the surface. You'll see them all diving down trying to catch their food whilst we were out there.
So you're saying this little one is different than all these guys?
Yeah, you see it's got a slightly different colour bill. So the other ones are sort of like a yellowy orange, but this is more greeny yellow washed out colour. In breeding plumage, the lesser crested terns have like an all black head, like this nice black cap that goes all the way down to the bill. But the great crested terns have like a white forehead, which makes them easier. They're slightly larger, slightly different shade of grey, but then we're getting into the minutiae of bird identification, which may put some people to sleep really, but I like that kind of thing.
And there's this little one that's very cute.
Yeah, this is a greater sand plover, and they breed like in sort of like Asia and some parts of Turkey and Eastern Europe, and we were getting them migrating around. And this was on one of the islands, and it shot all the way across us. Very beautiful little bird to see out there as well. So there's all these like shorebirds, wading birds that are utilising some of the islands as well, and the coastline as well, which is nice.
And I don't know if we pulled this up earlier, but we were talking about ospreys, and this is much fiercer than what I thought it would look like collecting rope.
Yeah, I mean, well, they're designed to catch fish from the surface and slightly below, and look at these massive claws and massive long talons sticking out the bottom, and they dive down, plunging into the water with their wings folded back, grab their fish, and that beautiful heavy beak is designed to tear large chunks of the fish away. You can see it's quite a power bird, and anyone who's used to seeing osprey should notice that this is very power looking in comparison to Northern European or the North American race. So that's why one of the reasons why they think this is a separate potentially a separate race, possibly even a separate species of bird as well. But they're very, very beautiful. These are nearly resident, where the other ones all tend to migrate a fair bit as well.
Do they tangle with, like sometimes an eagle will try to steal the catch of an osprey here anyway? Do the Red Sea ospreys have that problem? Are there other predators like trying to mess up their catch?
No, not really, because the only eagles that are resident in that part of the Middle East are normally up in the mountains. So the only eagles you get moving through along the coast, which is rare, is migrating ones. And they're going to use the thermals of the mountain ranges to head south into Africa. So you don't normally get that mix at all. What we did have issues with, which Simon was talking about, was that where you had very low populations of sooty falcons, the gulls were trying to mob them to get their food, because it was an easy meal. Where you had a large population of the sooty falcons, anything that went near, including the ospreys, including any gulls, just had like half a dozen sooty falcons dive bombing it at a time, so they obviously didn't hang around and disappeared off quite sharpish.
We have the other gulls. You were talking about with those birds of how distinctive their calls are. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but if I were to play a call, could you tell me which of those birds it is, do you think?
Let's give it a go.
All right. Let's try.
That sounds like the osprey.
No.
It's quite tinny to hear. Oh, great crested tern, or lesser crested tern calling, begging.
Yeah, it is the great crested turd. I don't know why I said no like that, where I wouldn't know. Here, let's try. This was one I had played for Micah.
I need to warm up a bit. Hold on. Oh, do a stretch, get ready.
Simon's warming up. I see him getting hydrated over there.
Yeah, that's it. Hot day. For the UK, it's a hot day.
All right. What's the other one?
Did you play it?
Yeah, that's the one that confused Micah. It sounds like the ocean because it's got the waves.
From memory, that would be my white-eyed gull, because I remember there was a lot of wave action, I think, in the background. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
Then it'd be the sooty gull. Was it the sooty gull? I'm trying to remember what recordings had waves in them. That's the only way I can identify, because I can't hear a bird at all. I've got to say, I'm blinded totally.
I couldn't.
Are we talking in that one as well? Can you hear us talking?
No, it's the bird. Yeah, they're hard to hear. Here, this is, well, it's not the hint, it's the answer. But, so, because these are all seabirds, but that one sounded like you were on the boat or you were in the ocean recording that sound. I was like,
we were on the edge of the island.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, and the waves were quite strong, and like the trouble with sound recording, especially with powerful mics, is they pick up everything. So what you hear with your ears, and you can distinguish between the waves crashing and a gull flying over. When you fire the mic at it, it picks up everything, so everything's quite amplified. So then you sound like you're in a gale force condition, and the bird's making tiny little calls. So it's very difficult. I did try to edit as much of the external sounds out of these as possible, but when you get overlap, it's a bit tricky. But yeah, these were the brown boobies. They were swirling around. They'd already bred, and they started calling a little bit as they were going around. So I thought it was really interesting to catch that sound, because normally they're only recorded like at their breeding site displaying, and this was just a flock making odd calls, which was good.
We have a couple of chat questions that I think would be good to throw at you guys. Somebody had questions about the albatross, which we did mention earlier. It was Ryan. He wants to know exactly why they spend so long never touching land, like up to years at a time, right? And how do they do that? How do they rest? Like, what the hell? What's the deal with the albatross? People want to know.
I mean, it's quite simple in one respect, in that when you go to small birds like the European robin, they will try to have up to 3 broods a year, and that's how many times they lay their eggs, and there can be up to 6 eggs. So you could have 18 young being produced by the European robins, yeah? But that's because they have a very high mortality rate and expected them all to, most of them to die. They only expect a few of them to survive to the end of the year. Some albatross species lay one egg every 2 years. Because they have such a high success rate, they don't need to invest that much to maintain the population. And then albatrosses spend up to 5 to 6 years before they become mature enough and reach their adult plumage to start breeding. And it's quite simple in that these seabirds just spend a lot of time out to sea. So they've got these long shearing wings, so they can just glide around on the slightest of breeze without having to flap much at all. But obviously they're still feeding, and they can sleep on the water as well. So it's not like they don't do anything on rest. They're not flying all the time for the whole 2 years. They are flying around, they're landing on the sea, they're feeding, and the chances are some of these may actually land on the odd little rocky outcrop somewhere to rest up as well. What we tend to do now is we do GPS tagging of birds, and then we can picture exactly where they're going and what they're doing, and they've become so sophisticated. You've got the altitude as well, and you can actually tell what the wings are doing. Are they flapping continuously? Are they just gliding? So much more telemetry coming out of these sort of things, so you get a real better impression of what all these birds are doing. But yeah, they just don't need to breed so often, so why come to land?
Two different strategies. Like one, the smaller birds are kind of doing a spray and pray, like let's put up a lot of shots and a few of them will stick.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then yeah, if you watch a video of an albatross, like man, it looks effortless. It really does look like they're kind of just resting.
But they're designed for minimum effort when they're flying. You know, small birds are designed, like the robins are designed to be feeding constantly around. That's what they're designed for. If an albatross tries to do that, it's going to look really messy. But out to sea, they're designed to glide for hours at a time. It's like an eagle. Eagles are designed to be up in the sky, lift up in the slightest breeze, and just hang around for ages while they do their hunting or they're migrating thousands of miles. It's what they're designed for. You don't get a sprinter in a boxing ring, do you?
No, that's a good analogy. That would be pretty sad.
It would, yeah. It'd be quick though, running around all the time.
That's right. If the boxer could catch them. So somebody else in the chat, Shuza ASAP, is curious about like how you get accepted on an expedition like Ocean X project, and which one of you got involved first?
So it was our company, Turnstone Ecology, got contracted to do some work for the project as a whole. To like I was saying, to do an island inventory. We've done stuff on the land around there as well. So getting information about every species, so not just the birds, as many species as we can. And then we work with David over here in the UK quite regularly. So we got him on board as well. So yeah, it was sort of Turnstone that got the initial contact, and then just incredibly lucky because it was like the boat, the Ocean X stuff sort of came more or less out of the blue. We were expecting to go over there, but then it just so happened that the Ocean X team were looking at going to the islands at the same time as we were, so we managed to stow away and hitch a ride, and it's mind blowing. It's an incredible boat.
Yeah, so I run my own company, Bird Brand UK, and then they brought me in because I've got quite a lot of Middle East experience, and you know, I've also been trained to do specialist seabird surveys as well. So that's how I came on board. But it was interesting, good fun, challenging at times, a whole mixture of stuff.
Do you guys consider yourselves, well, now I'm like, oh, you're on board with like, you know, marine geologists and all kinds of like, you know, really scientists. And that was kind of a question I had for this chat too. Like, if you say we're talking to some ornithologists on our YouTube channel today, I don't know, like how much traction do you get with the general public when you say you're an ornithologist? Like, how do you conceive of what you do and how do you describe it to people?
It's quite weird. In the UK, lots of everyone knows what a bird is, and it's the same globally. Everyone knows what a bird is, and there's quite an interest generally in wildlife and things like that. So most people think it's a pretty interesting job, and it really is. So yeah, like everyone's seen a bird, everyone's slightly intrigued by them, and we just have made it our jobs. It's just one of those things you get paid to be doing what you love.
I think that's the trouble, is that most people just think, oh, people just go bird watching, it's a hobby, it's just an interest. But then to make a career out of it, make a living, become a specialist in that field, people are a bit kind of like amazed as to how you do it. So normally I get asked, how do you make all your money? Well, how do you make your money? Not all your money, but how do you make your money? And that's where they become a bit more interested in what I do. You know, a lot of it's to do with planning permission, that sort of thing. And then you get this research stuff, which is great fun to do as well. But, you know, for me, I just put my fingers in as many pies as possible and see what happens, really. You know, I lead walks, I give lectures, whatever comes my way. They said, oh, do you want to go on a boat for 6 weeks? I was like, yeah, why not? What's the worst that could happen at sea, eh?
Did anything terrible happen? Well, what? No. You're here to
It was a dream from like a personal perspective, and it was an absolute dream for me, because I've always been interested in, when I was younger, I was mad on sharks and fish and everything like that. So I've been a diver for a long time as well. So to get to hang around with proper professionals and filmmakers, just doing that sort of thing you wouldn't even dream of being able to do as a kid. If I told my 7-year-old self what we'd done in September, October last year, I wouldn't have believed it.
You've been calling Oh, go ahead, David. I didn't mean to step on you there. Carry on.
That's all right. For me, it was really being with like-minded scientists. Although they're interested in different aspects of the science world, they were all just mad keen on it. And it made me feel really at home with all these people. And the worst thing that happened to me was I dropped my mic in the Red Sea, and it didn't work for about 4 days. And I was freaking out about that, because my mic is my baby. Don't mess with my mic. So I had to wash it out and dry it out before it started making proper sounds and was recording properly again. That was the worst moment of my sea. I was almost beside myself with it. I got me emotional. Don't start me.
Well, I was going to say, so you're probably hearing all kinds of beautiful bird sounds while your mic was out of commission, because that's the way this works.
Yeah, typically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had a backup mic. It's just not as good as my parabolic mic, which is like a big bowl with a mic set in it to amplify the sound as much as possible.
I'm surprised you got the mic back, because in my experience, once it touches the ocean water, it's gone for me.
The water, yeah, wrecker.
I can't find it. I've seen someone throw something in there and they're like, never found it again. It's gone.
I was using it yesterday, so it's still good to go.
It was a bit crackly for a bit, wasn't it? But it dried out fine in the end.
Yeah.
Simon, you said, so right before we went live, I asked David and Simon what they'd been doing all day. And Simon said he'd been doing stuff with bats, putting up bat boxes. So now I'm like wondering, we've been calling you a bird man, but are you less of an ornithologist and more of a general ecologist?
Yeah, so my job title is ecologist, but it means, well, I've done everything all over the world as well. So yeah, I'm pretty interested in most stuff that's alive, essentially. So yeah, today I was trying to catch bats in a roof, and then do stuff with reptiles, great crested newts as well, which is a bit weird. So catching newts in pond, or looking at newts in ponds, badgers, birds and bats tends to be the majority of what I do, though.
If people are aspiring Simons and Davids, I mean, what did you guys do? Major in ecology, or kind of David mentioned, like you were talking about just being around people that are keen on what discovering stuff. Like, is enthusiasm and being out in the field enough to get into this?
Yeah, it's being enthusiastic, being keen, asking the right questions, just being curious. You've got to. I would say there's a couple of the students on the Ocean X trip that are asking the same thing, and I just said you've got to go on all the rides. If you're gonna do it, just be available. Don't be the last person. Don't be the person that they're waiting for, and just keep asking questions, because it makes such a good impression, and you'll always be learning as well.
For me, I wouldn't worry too much about your qualifications. If you've got a degree in ecology, that's all good, but learn whatever you want to learn. Like if you want to go into birds, learn everything you can. Read all the time about them, learn how to identify them in many different ways, and that's what really gets you to the place. You know, people come to me because I know the birds, I understand what's going on, and I can advise them on a job or whatever it is. It's just really understanding your specialist species or your group or whatever it is as much as possible. You can't beat having lots of field experiences. So go out and do surveys that you may not be paid for as a volunteer, try and get on as much experience as you can. It's that real life experience that really gives you the edge and pushes you away, because you can study it, but it's very different to participate and actually undertake the surveys. It's one thing going on one island, but when you've done 20 islands or you've worked in the desert for 40 days non-stop, completely different to just dabbling into it. And it's that experience that gives you a mass amount of knowledge that you can then draw on to work on anything really.
So if I wanted to leave my media job behind and make a little midlife career pivot, you're telling me I need to start getting out there and surveying some birds on my weekends?
Yes, all the time. You need to live it and breathe it and smell it. You just got to absorb as much as you can all of the time. Yeah, and talk to people. When I go to a nature reserve, I ask the wardens what they're doing about management, what are they doing about surveying, and just get into a conversation about it. And that's how you learn, because all these people out there have masses of information, and it's just drawing down on it to give you more knowledge to get the work, to advise people, to understand about birds.
All right, I feel stirred. Oh, somebody in the chat just asked how you got educated. So that was good timing. And they're curious if you guys have birds as pets. Well, somebody here has a cat as a pet, which I think is interesting for a bird.
Doesn't go outside. She's very much a house cat, and she's very lazy. So she doesn't catch any birds, thankfully. But we wouldn't keep birds as a pet. That's not very kind. We'd much rather see them flying around wild.
Yeah, I have no pets at all. Nothing.
Feed them in the garden, but don't keep a bird in a cage. It's not fair.
All right, Bangs Gabble. Another question from the chat was what are some of the funniest bird names? There's
You've seen one today.
Sapsucker and a dick sissel. A lot of bird names sound like insults, and the robin is in the family Turdidae, which is
Turdus.
Yeah, it's pretty rude for the robin. So I'm curious if you guys have any favorite ridiculous bird names.
Well, Boobie, that you've seen already, that's pretty funny. Blue-footed Boobie, even more so. Cock of the Rock. They're normally sort of genitalia related, which isn't particularly family friendly.
No, there's an odd species like long-billed dowitcher, what is a dowitcher? I mean, I have no idea what that is, and there's a North American, I think it's blue and white gnatcatcher, which again is odd words. Yellow-bellied sapsucker as well, but that relates to the trees a bit. There's nuthatches as well. Things like a jay, which is Jay, which again is a bit odd. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I got used to them all, so it's kind of a bit. You can't ask me, what's that odd bird name?
We don't even smirk anymore when we hear them. It's fine. Completely stony-faced.
You're too jaded. You're too in it. Well, how about this? We sort of talked about sooty falcons are pretty rare, and if you're a birder out there who's into raptors, get a new favorite raptor. This is a cool obscure one. Are there underrated birds? I mean, the gull, for instance, that we talked about. I don't know. I have a newfound appreciation for them. You kind of just see them skulking around in parking lots, but it's cool that those beaks they have, they can eat anything. They're such generalists. Or we were talking about the albatross earlier. So I don't know, who's an underrated bird that you think that people should appreciate more?
Most birds, I think, are fairly underrated. So if you look at your European robin or your European blackbird, we will see them in the UK all the time. But when it comes to the autumn, the birds that are breeding up in Russia and Northern Europe, the temperature plummets to minus 10 degrees or whatever, and it's covered in snow. So these birds peg it out of places like that, migrate down into places like Britain, even go further south. So the birds that you see in your garden all the time may not be the same ones. You got masses of migration going on all the time, which you're not aware of. So for example, if you're in New York and you go in your local park and there's a ring-billed gull there, that may have bred somewhere up in Alaska. And then it's come to New York to spend the winters. They're traversing long distances. You're just seeing a little bit of thing, thinking, oh, there's a few more mallards here. There's another ring-necked duck or a tufted duck come down here. But they may have travelled thousands of miles to come to where you are to winter. And in the summer, we've got thousands and millions of warblers migrating north. So you've got all your old world warblers, like our wood warblers, coming up into northern Europe to breed. They spent the winter in Africa. And then you've got your North American stuff that are going up into Canada to breed and other parts of America. Then they're down, maybe spending the winter in Central America or even South America as well. So they're doing these massive long migration routes, and some of them are non-stop. So like there was a wading bird in Alaska called a bar-tailed godwit. It's only about that big. Get around the British coast as well, around Europe. And when they GPS tagged this one, it flew non-stop from Alaska all the way down to New Zealand. Something like about 11,000 kilometers in 9 days. So when you look at these little birds, and you may not realise that your robin in your garden in UK may have flown all the way across the North Sea in just under 4 hours to come into your garden. You just look and think, oh, that's a nice robin. What's that doing? It's not doing much, just sitting around all the time. But that bird may have flown thousands of miles. So the birds all around you now could be huge long distance migrants. And you're looking at premium athletes in front of you, and you're completely blasé to it. There's another crow. What's that Jay doing?
You guys get hummingbirds that go from Canada down into South America. You think of the size of them. It's absolutely nuts. They can do that journey. Our smallest bird, goldcrest, it's not quite the same, but it migrates across the North Sea, so good few hundred miles straight, and that's really tiny.
It does give you a newfound, and at night a lot of the songbirds are on the move, right? So, or here anyway. I don't know if it's the same there. I don't see why it would be different, but yeah, like when you're asleep above your head, all these tiny little guys, as you said, are doing their premium athlete.
Well, some of them are flying at real high altitudes, like up to 5 kilometers up in the sky. So they're not just flying low down. Some are low, some are really high up as well. So you've got a huge mix. And some of these birds are migrating only at night. Some will continue for days at a time. Some are only migrating during the day. So there's a real mixture of what's going on. You know, if you walk down the street and a swallow goes over, they may be heading down to Africa. You know, it may be coming back from southern South America, going back up into the northern hemisphere to breed again. A real complete mixture of stuff, and we're just kind of like, you're only just understanding the tip of the iceberg that's going on. And as our GPS trackers become smaller, we get a much better idea about what all these birds are doing. 2 birds breeding side by side, like there's a bird called a red-necked phalarope, and they're a tiny little wading bird, and they breed up in Norway, and those Norwegian birds can like migrate across Central Europe and spend the winter like in the Arabian Sea and Indian Sea. And yet the ones on Shetland Isles off Scotland, they go around the side of Ireland, and they've been known to fly all the way across to America and then winter off South America and then come all the way back. So 2 birds next door to each other, winter in completely different opposite parts of the world. And we always think, well, they're beside each other, they're neighbours, they're going to go to the same place, aren't they? No, we need to ignore all of that. Birds are doing their thing, and the more we learn, the more interesting these stories get to tell people like you guys. I just dropped a pen on the floor.
That's enthusiasm. He's throwing things around. Well, I'm curious, like as we sort of start wrapping up, we'll be respectful of your time, although I could listen to your bird stories for a long time. So you went to the Red Sea, you took the survey of the population there, you found out who was living there, you had clipboards, you took photos, you did recordings, you brought it all back. It's been months. Have you learned anything cool? Like what did you do with all that info that you gathered, and where are you at with it now?
So it's feeding into sort of long-term management plans for the project as a whole. And then it's sort of the first level of baseline data. So we're hopefully going to be able to get back in the region as a whole and get some more information, give it a couple of years worth of data, and then get some proper management plans written up and hopefully adhered to. It should be brilliant.
Did you find
so all this information adds to understanding about the populations on the islands and rechanges what we understand and what the birds are doing. So, for example, we saw lots of terns still out to sea in November when we would have expected them to be much further south down towards Africa wintering by this stage, but they weren't. So it may be that these are indicators of the global warming, shifting of sea temperatures and fish populations, which then adds to all this information that's out there, not just about the ecology during the breeding cycle, but also outside of that during the non-breeding cycle as well.
Did you find out anything interesting in the video? You're dissecting a little pellet, and we talked about that was a warbler that had been eaten by a sooty falcon.
Yes. Yeah. So we found that pellet was actually on board Ocean X. We found that. So we missed the bird coming on board, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, we took that downstairs, dissected it, and found that it was either a yellow-browed or a Pallas's warbler, I think. And they're not particularly common in that area. So like that even itself adds a bit of information. So the sort of edge of range, you would call it. So they normally would be a bit further north or a bit further east or west.
This is kind of like my what do you learn from the calls recording question, but about pellets. Like, I know pellets show you what the bird ate, but is there something that we don't know about things that you're learning from pellets?
Yeah, well, you get like that, really. You find birds which you possibly wouldn't have expected to find there, just the remains of it. So there's in the UK, I think there's one of the there's peregrines nesting on one of the cathedrals. I think it's in Derby, isn't it? And they've found that they hunt at night, and they've got an incredible number of different species which almost no one's ever seen actually over the city, but they're obviously flying over because they're turning up at the base of the peregrines' nests.
The real interesting thing with the sooty falcons will be able to collect pellets across the whole of their breeding cycle to understand exactly what their prey is as we go through the whole season. But that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of people power to get out there and gather that information. But that'll be really fascinating to see, do they vary their diet according to the season? Are there particular things they go for a bit more than other species? But it's quite hard to work out exactly what's going on because one single feather can marry up to several different species very easily.
But then, like the size, you could do a really good study on sort of the size of bird that they're taking based on the time of year, and if they're more hungry, whether they'd take a slightly larger bird. Because they took bigger stuff than we were expecting, I think, didn't they? Like the hoopoe was a pretty good sized bird for them to take down. Not too hard for them to catch, but certainly a reasonable size with a big beak on it.
David, I was waiting for you to have a rejoinder about the hoopoe.
the black and white feather that we're holding in the video, that was from a hoopoe, I think, wasn't it?
That was from a wheatear's tail feather.
Oh, was it?
I'm sure. Yeah, I think so. They look like a tail retrocy. I mean, the hoopoe, to be honest, I can't remember the full diet because I've been working on other species. My mind is then filled with other information. I can't remember the full range of the diet of a sooty falcon, to be honest.
That's fair. That's not maybe something you want to give too much brain real estate to when it's like, in the past, it's a pretty small population. I'm sure you've got it written down somewhere. Is there anything that kind of like, as we're wrapping up, you guys, I don't know, want the ocean friends at home to know about your work? What are you working on next?
Well, I'm going off to do a load of barn owl surveys, investigate nest sites, and then I should be back out in the Middle East potentially doing some autumn migration work as well, which is always good fun. I'm looking forward to that. Loads of birds migrating through. This gets me very excited. Masses of birds, thousands of birds to count in a day, and I'm happy as Larry.
Similar, really. We're hoping to get out there in autumn time. We've got a good few projects other places as well, so as soon as we're allowed to go anywhere, we're hopefully going to be shipping off and getting to some more interesting places as well. So we've got projects in Uzbekistan, Turkey, Kenya as well. So hopefully actually get back out there where we haven't been able to go for the last 18 months. Fingers crossed.
Wow, that's such a cool itinerary. I'm a little jealous. I don't know, Jessica, did you have other questions that we wanted to quickly get in as we wrap?
I have, it's a little off topic, but I feel like a lot of people in New York have big opinions on pigeons. And I was just curious, since we were talking about underrated birds, since you guys love birds, do you also love pigeons, or do you have the same feelings that most New Yorkers have about them?
Falcon food. They're good for keeping populations of peregrines.
That's a good.
I respect the pigeon as a, what are they, rock doves? And they made it work in New York. You got to respect the, okay, we don't have cliffs, we have...
You see, the rock dove is not the same bird you get in the cities. So what you get in the cities is a feral pigeon, which is basically the rock dove is what we used to get breeding on cliffs around the coastline here across the globe. And then what we done was we used to use them as homing pigeons to send messages, and we bred them in such a way to purify them in whatever way we deemed, and therefore you've actually got something that's slightly different enough for me to know that that's not a rock dove when you see your feral pigeons wandering around the streets and stuff like that. But they're part of the background, they're part of the urban life. I'm not particularly keen on them, but I won't wish them to be annihilated or anything like that. You know, they provide food, but they can be an issue for some people as well. Buildings and stuff like that.
I was just curious. That did scratch a niche because even with the weather all over New York, I'm still seeing these pigeons coming up towards my windows, and I'm like, you are really resilient in this city.
They don't seem that smart either. I guess, well, I won't cast stones at the pigeons who are out there surviving. And I think I like Simon's take. I think I like Simon's take. Like, let's appreciate them for supporting the raptor population, which also celebrity raptors in the city. Big fan. There's the pale male in New York. He's like kind of a celebrity hawk. Anyway, could go on about those guys.
There's the owl in Central Park. So if you ever see a crowd of people in Central Park around a tree and you don't know what it is, it's usually because they're looking at the owl, and there's only one.
Central Park.
The great horned owl, because there was a snowy owl in Central Park over the winter, I think.
I'm not sure which owl. I only know it's white. That's what people say. They're like,
that would be the snowy owl that turned up. Yeah. Very impressive bird.
You guys get celebrity bird news from across the pond over there, or you follow it avidly.
Yeah, I pick it up through Twitter, through people that I follow. So you pick up information from around the globe. I remember, I think it was in China or Japan, a European robin turned up, and there was thousands of people looking at that. So, you know, a common bird somewhere is an amazingly rare somewhere else.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to kind of wrap up on, is that birds are fascinating. When you look at a bird, you're only seeing the tip of an iceberg. They're elite athletes. Thank you guys for rapping with us about birds and the Red Sea. Thanks everybody in the chat for asking your good questions. Keep appreciating the birds. That's all I got for you. Have a good day or evening, depending on where you may be watching from.
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you.